In the spring of 1519, far from the hills where he had been born, an old man lay dying in a quiet manner beside the royal chateau of Amboise. He was 67 years old. His right hand had grown weak. His body no longer obeyed him as it once had. Around him stood notebooks filled with backward writing, diagrams of muscles and rivers, sketches of machines that would not exist for centuries, and paintings he had carried across mountains rather than leave behind. One of them showed a woman with folded hands and a smile so slight that generations would argue over what it meant. Another showed St. John emerging from darkness, raising one finger toward a mystery beyond the frame. And another gathered a mother, a child, and an elderly woman into a quiet storm of movement and tenderness. Leonardo da Vinci had spent a lifetime trying to understand almost everything the eye could see. Yet even at the end, he believed he had not finished. He had designed monuments that were never cast, painted walls that began to decay almost as soon as they were completed, planned machines no workshop of his age could build, and filled thousands of pages with questions that no single life could answer. He had served dukes, merchants, generals, priests, and kings. He had studied the human body by candlelight. He had watched birds until flight became a mathematical problem. He had stared into water until rivers seemed to him like veins inside the earth. He had painted the most famous face in history. And still, when death approached, Leonardo did not see himself as a man who had completed everything. He saw what remained undone. That may be the most important truth about him. The world remembers a genius. Leonardo remembered the distance between what he imagined and what he had managed to create. To understand how the illegitimate son of a Tuscan notary became the symbol of the Renaissance, we must look beyond the legend of the effortless master. We must follow the abandoned projects, the restless journeys, the rivalries, the political collapses, the dangerous dissections, and the endless pages on which he tried to trap the movement of life itself. Because Leonardo's story is not simply the story of extraordinary talent. It is the story of a mind that could not stop asking what lay beneath the surface. And that gift would become both his power and his burden. He was born on the evening of April 15th, 1452, in the Tuscan countryside near the small town of Vinci. His full name was not originally the grand title by which history knows him. Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci simply meant Leonardo, son of Ser Piero, from Vinci. His father, Ser Piero, was a notary, a profession that carried education, influence, and connection. His mother, Caterina, was a young woman of more modest status. The details of her life remain uncertain, and later generations have tried to fill the silence with confident stories. What is clear is that Leonardo's parents were not married to one another. In 15th century Italy, illegitimacy placed limits on a child's future. Leonardo could not easily inherit his father's profession. He did not receive the kind of classical education that might have trained him in Latin from an early age. He would later struggle with the language of scholars and sometimes describe himself, almost defensively, as a man without letters. But exclusion can shape a mind in unexpected ways. Leonardo was not formed mainly by the schoolroom. He was formed by looking. The landscape around Vinci was made of steep ridges, olive groves, rocky streams, changing clouds, twisted roots, and distant mountains fading into blue. Water carved through stone. Mist dissolved the edges of the world. Fossil shells appeared in places far above the sea. For most children, these were simply parts of the countryside. For Leonardo, they became questions. Why did water curl around obstacles? Why did the sky become pale near the horizon? Why did distant mountains look blue? How did branches divide as trees grew? How could birds remain suspended in the air? What force shaped the spirals of shells, the curls of hair, and the whirlpools of rivers? The boy who would one day paint sacred scenes began with the physical world. He learned before he could fully explain. He noticed before he could prove. And he developed a habit that would define his entire life. He did not merely see objects. He studied relationships. A shadow belonged to the object that blocked the light, but also to the light source, the surface beneath it, the air between them, and the position of the observer. A face was not only a face. It was skin stretched over muscles, emotion passing through nerves, memory changing expression, light entering the eye, and time slowly reshaping every feature. A river was not only water. It was motion, pressure, erosion, reflection, danger, nourishment, and the visible sign of invisible forces. This way of seeing would later make him appear almost supernatural. But it began quietly, in the hills of Tuscany, with a child who watched more carefully than those around him. Leonardo spent parts of his childhood within his father's extended household. Ser Piero married several times and eventually had many legitimate children, but Leonardo was the oldest. He seems to have been accepted by the family, though his position remained unusual. He was close enough to the world of respectability to observe it, but not fully bound to its expected path. That freedom mattered. A legitimate son of a notary might have been trained to copy contracts, study law, and preserve family status. Leonardo was allowed to drift toward drawing. At some point during his youth, his ability became impossible to ignore. Later biographers told charming stories about the young Leonardo. One account describes his father taking some of the boy's drawings to Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the leading artists in Florence. Another story claims Leonardo decorated a wooden shield with such a terrifying creature that Ser Piero was startled when he saw it. These tales may contain invention. Renaissance biography often mixed memory with legend, but they preserve something believable. Leonardo's talent appeared early, and it was strange enough to attract attention. By the late 1460s, he had entered Florence. The city would change him, and he would eventually change the way the city understood art. Florence was rich, competitive, religious, violent, and intellectually alive. Its merchants financed banks across Europe. Its guilds controlled professional life. Its churches and public buildings were filled with images designed not only to inspire faith, but also to display civic pride and private power. The city had survived factional conflict, plague, and political turmoil. Beneath the language of republican government, the Medici family exercised enormous influence. Cosimo de' Medici had built a dynasty through banking, alliances, patronage, and patience. By the time Leonardo arrived, Cosimo's grandson Lorenzo would soon become the dominant figure in Florence. This was the world later called the Renaissance. But the people living through it did not wake each morning believing they had entered a neatly defined golden age. They lived among ruins, ambitions, debts, sermons, epidemics, rival families, and unfinished buildings. The Renaissance was not a sudden rebirth created by a few isolated geniuses. It was a dense network of workshops, courts, libraries, trade routes, churches, competitions, and political struggles. Ancient texts were being recovered and reinterpreted. Wealthy patrons wanted monuments that linked them to Rome. Artists studied nature with new intensity. Engineers solved military and architectural problems. Mathematicians explored perspective. Humanists debated the dignity and potential of humankind. But the same society that celebrated beauty also witnessed executions, torture, war, and public conspiracy. Leonardo would learn to move through both worlds. His master, Andrea del Verrocchio, was not only a painter. He was a sculptor, goldsmith, designer, engineer, and manager of a large workshop. This was an ideal environment for Leonardo because Renaissance art did not yet exist as a narrow profession separated from craft and mechanics. A workshop could be asked to produce an altarpiece, a bronze statue, a ceremonial costume, a temporary stage set, a decorative shield, a tomb, or an engineering solution. Young apprentices learned by grinding pigments, preparing panels, mixing plaster, transferring designs, modeling clay, studying drapery, and copying the work of older masters. They also learned discipline. A great idea was useless if the surface cracked. A beautiful design could fail if the patron refused payment. A figure had to fit into a larger composition. A costly pigment could not be wasted. The workshop taught Leonardo how art was made in the real world. It also showed him how easily the real world could interfere with perfection. Verrocchio's shop attracted talented young men. Among those associated with it were artists who would build major careers of their own. Florence encouraged rivalry. Apprentices studied one another. Patrons compared them. Every public commission could become a contest. Leonardo learned quickly. His surviving early drawings reveal a hand already searching for movement rather than stiffness. He observed fabric as if it were a landscape. Heavy folds became ridges and valleys. Light traveled across cloth in gradual transitions. He drew heads with psychological presence, animals with tense energy, and plants with careful attention. He was also drawn to what changed. A sculpture remained still. Leonardo wanted to understand the instant before stillness disappeared. A horse turning its head, a man twisting in anger, a smile beginning, a wave breaking, a body falling. The challenge was not merely to copy the visible world, but to suggest what had just happened and what would happen next. This instinct can be seen in one of the most famous stories from his apprenticeship. Verrocchio received a commission for a painting of the baptism of Christ. In the completed work, one angel at the left is often attributed to Leonardo. The figure turns gently, its face soft, its hair luminous, its body integrated into the surrounding air. A later biographer claimed that when Verrocchio saw how beautifully Leonardo had painted the angel, he was so humiliated that he never painted again. The story is almost certainly exaggerated. Verrocchio continued to work as an artist, and large workshop paintings often involved several hands. Yet the comparison remains revealing. Leonardo's angel appears alive in a different way. The transitions between light and shadow are delicate. The expression is inward. The figure seems to breathe. That effect would become central to Leonardo's art. He understood that sharp outlines rarely exist in nature. The human eye does not always perceive a hard border between cheek and shadow, mountain and sky, body and atmosphere. Edges soften. Forms emerge gradually. Light scatters. Distance changes color. Leonardo would later develop this into the technique known as sfumato, a word connected to smoke. In his mature paintings, faces do not look cut from the background. They seem to form within the air. But the beauty came from relentless observation. He studied how light struck curved surfaces. He experimented with layers of translucent paint. He revised slowly, sometimes so slowly that patrons lost patience. This was the first sign of a conflict that would follow him for the rest of his life. Leonardo could imagine a work more perfectly than he could finish it. And once he began to understand the complexity of a problem, completion became harder, not easier. In 1472, Leonardo was recorded as a member of the Painters' Guild of St. Luke. He was now qualified to work independently, although he remained connected to Verrocchio's workshop for some time. He was about 20 years old. Florence offered opportunity, but it also demanded proof. Patrons did not pay for potential. They paid for finished objects. Leonardo began receiving commissions. Some vanished. Some were abandoned. Some survived only as drawings. The pattern that later frustrated dukes and monks was already beginning. One of his earliest major independent works was an Annunciation, now generally dated to the early part of his career. The scene shows the angel Gabriel kneeling before Mary in a garden. Behind them stretches a distant landscape of water and mountains. The painting contains youthful problems. Perspective and anatomy are not perfect. Yet the world feels unusually alert. Flowers are carefully observed. Wings are treated as structures rather than symbols. The distant landscape dissolves into atmosphere. The sacred event takes place inside nature, not apart from it. That mattered to Leonardo. He did not reject religion. He worked repeatedly for churches and religious patrons. But when he painted a miracle, he wanted the physical world to participate. If an angel had wings, how might those wings connect to a body? If divine light entered a room, how would it touch stone, fabric, skin, and air? If Mary felt shock, humility, and fear, how would those emotions move through her hands? His questions could make sacred art more convincing. They could also make the task almost endless. Around this same period, Florence was changing under Lorenzo de' Medici, known later as Lorenzo the Magnificent. Lorenzo cultivated poets, philosophers, artists, and diplomats. His court helped turn culture into political language. Beauty could display power without showing a weapon. A poem could strengthen prestige. A festival could shape public emotion. A painting could connect a patron to virtue, antiquity, and divine favor. Leonardo moved near this world, but he was never fully absorbed into it in the way some later writers imagined. He did not become a classical scholar like Marsilio Ficino. He was not primarily a poet or philosopher in the formal humanist tradition. His Latin remained limited for much of his life. But he listened. He absorbed ideas through conversation, observation, and practice. And he developed his own form of philosophy, built not from authority but from experience. He distrusted claims that could not survive examination. He wanted to test. He wanted to compare. He wanted to see for himself. This attitude would eventually lead him into anatomy, geology, optics, mechanics, hydrodynamics, and flight. But before those investigations reached their full intensity, Leonardo was forced to confront the dangers of Florence. In April 1476, an anonymous accusation was submitted to the city authorities. Leonardo and several other young men were accused of sexual relations with a male prostitute. The charge was serious. Florence had a reputation for same-sex relations, but the law punished sodomy, and accusations could destroy careers or lives. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence. It was later raised again and dismissed again. The surviving records tell us little about Leonardo's private feelings, and responsible history cannot transform accusation into certainty. He never married, and no clear evidence identifies a long-term sexual partner. Speculation has continued for centuries. What can be said is that the experience must have revealed how quickly public reputation could become dangerous. For a young artist without the protection of a powerful family name, the city could be both stage and trap. Leonardo continued working, but something in his career remained unsettled. He received a commission in 1478 for an altarpiece in the Palazzo Vecchio. It was never completed. Then came a larger opportunity. In 1481, the monks of San Donato a Scopedo commissioned him to paint the Adoration of the Magi, the infant Christ receiving the three kings. Leonardo turned it into something far more disturbing. In the unfinished painting, figures swirl around Mary and the child. Faces emerge from shadow. Hands point, recoil, and reach. In the background, architecture collapses or rises. Horses struggle. Men fight. The calm center is surrounded by human confusion. The work is not polished, but its unfinished state allows us to see Leonardo thinking. He builds the scene through layers of movement. Every figure reacts differently. Some understand, some doubt, some turn away, some are overwhelmed. The miracle is not shown as a simple ceremony. It is shown as an event powerful enough to disturb the entire world around it. Had Leonardo completed the painting, it might have transformed his position in Florence. But he did not complete it. Before long, he left the city. The reason was not one dramatic event. Career frustration, political opportunity, personal ambition, and the attraction of a new court may all have played a part. Florence was crowded with talent. Milan offered a different kind of future. And Leonardo did not present himself to Milan's ruler mainly as a painter. He presented himself as a man who could build the machinery of war. That decision would open the most productive chapter of his life. It would also place him in service to one of the most dangerous political families in Italy. When Leonardo traveled north toward Milan, Italy was not a unified country. It was a landscape of competing states. Florence, Milan, Venice, Naples, the Papal States, and smaller courts fought through alliances, mercenaries, marriages, assassinations, and sudden betrayals. A ruler could appear secure in the morning and discover by nightfall that his allies had changed sides. Milan was wealthy, strategic, and heavily militarized. It controlled routes through northern Italy and stood close to the passes leading across the Alps. Its ruling dynasty, the Sforza, had risen from the world of mercenary warfare. Francesco Sforza had seized the duchy through force and marriage. His son Galeazzo Maria was assassinated in a church in 1476. Power eventually gathered around Galeazzo's brother, Ludovico Sforza, a calculating figure later known as Il Moro, the Moor. Ludovico ruled first in the name of his young nephew, John Galeazzo, but his ambitions went far beyond guardianship. He wanted legitimacy, prestige, military strength, and a court that could rival any in Europe. Leonardo understood what such a man might value. In a remarkable letter, probably written in the early 1480s, Leonardo listed the services he could provide. He described portable bridges, methods for destroying fortifications, armored vehicles, cannon designs, tunnels, naval weapons, and machines for siege warfare. Only near the end did he add that in times of peace, he could also create architecture, sculpture, and painting. The letter reads like the proposal of an engineer who happened to be an artist. Some of the claims were ambitious. Some designs may never have moved beyond imagination. But Leonardo had recognized a central truth of Renaissance patronage. Talent had to be translated into the language of a ruler's needs. Ludovico needed war machines. Leonardo promised war machines. Ludovico needed ceremonies. Leonardo could design ceremonies. Ludovico needed monuments that would make the Sforza dynasty appear permanent. Leonardo could promise a monument unlike anything Italy had seen. He entered Milan around the age of 30. The city was larger and more severe than Florence. Its climate was mistier. Its court culture was formal. Its architecture included massive brick fortifications and the unfinished cathedral rising from the center. For Leonardo, Milan became a laboratory. He stayed for roughly 17 years, longer than in any other major phase of his adult career. During that time, he painted, designed, staged, taught, studied, dissected, planned canals, advised on architecture, and filled notebooks at an astonishing rate. Yet the beginning was not immediate triumph. Court life required patience. Leonardo had to prove that his range was useful rather than merely eccentric. He played music, likely on a silver lyre he had designed. Contemporary accounts praised his appearance, conversation, and skill as a performer. He could charm a room when he chose. This social ability is sometimes lost behind the image of the solitary genius. Leonardo needed patrons. He needed assistants. He needed access to materials, workshops, bodies, libraries, stables, and construction sites. His work depended on relationships. At the same time, he guarded his independence. He rarely allowed any single institution to define him. One of his first major Milanese painting commissions came not directly from Ludovico, but from a religious confraternity associated with the Church of San Francesco Grande. Leonardo and the brothers Evangelista and Ambrogio de Predis were contracted to produce an altarpiece for the Chapel of the Immaculate Conception. The central panel became the painting now known as the Virgin of the Rocks. The scene is strange and dreamlike. Mary sits among dark stones, water, and unusual plants. The infant Christ, the young John the Baptist, and an angel form a quiet circle of gestures. The landscape does not resemble a safe Italian garden. It resembles the interior of the earth, a world shaped before human memory. Figures emerge from shadow as if revealed by a hidden light. There is no crowded architecture, no throne, no heavy gold background. Nature itself becomes the sacred chamber. Leonardo's geology and spirituality meet in the same image. The rocks are not decorative. They suggest deep time, erosion, and forces older than civilization. The water wins through darkness. Plants grow with careful specificity. The human figures are tender, but they are surrounded by a world that feels ancient and mysterious. A dispute over payment and the exact terms of the commission followed. The history is complicated, and two major versions of the composition survive, one in Paris and one in London. Scholars continue to study the sequence, collaboration, and revisions. What matters for Leonardo's story is that even one of his most beautiful works became entangled in delay and conflict. The pattern continued. Patrons wanted a product. Leonardo wanted to solve a universe of problems inside the product. This did not make him lazy. His notebooks show the opposite. He worked constantly, but his labor did not always lead toward the object he had been paid to finish. A question about painting could lead to optics. Optics could lead to the structure of the eye. The eye could lead to anatomy. Anatomy could lead to proportion. Proportion could lead to mechanics. Mechanics could lead to water. Water could lead to geology. And by the time Leonardo returned to the original painting, months or years might have passed. His mind did not travel in straight lines. It moved in spirals. During his Milan years, Leonardo began or expanded many of the notebook habits for which he became famous. He wrote on loose sheets and in small-bound volumes. He recorded expenses, jokes, names, shopping lists, philosophical observations, diagrams, drafts of letters, and sudden questions. One page might contain the design of a gear. Another might study the lips. Another might ask how a woodpecker's tongue works. Another might remind him to describe why the moon appears larger near the horizon. He wrote many notes from right to left in mirror script. This has inspired fantasies that he was hiding secret knowledge. The simpler explanation is more convincing. Leonardo was left-handed, and writing backward may have reduced smudging while allowing the hand to move naturally. He sometimes wrote in the ordinary direction when another person needed to read the text. His mirror writing was unusual. It was not evidence of a secret society. The true mystery is not why he reversed his letters. It is how one mind found enough urgency to fill page after page with subjects that most people would never think to connect. Leonardo treated drawing as a form of reasoning. A drawing was not merely an illustration made after an idea became clear. It was how the idea became clear. He drew machines from multiple angles. He cut away walls and surfaces to reveal internal structures. He used lines to show force, motion, pressure, and flow. He exaggerated features when necessary to make a mechanism understandable. This visual thinking allowed him to move between art and science before those fields had hardened into modern categories. To him, the painter needed anatomy because the painter represented bodies. The engineer needed drawing because machines had to be imagined before they could be built. The anatomist needed mechanics because muscles pulled bones like ropes moving levers. The student of water needed geometry because currents followed patterns. Knowledge was one connected landscape. The divisions came later. At Ludovico's court, Leonardo also became a master of temporary wonder. Renaissance courts spent enormous sums on festivals, weddings, theatrical performances, triumphal entries, and pageants. These spectacles lasted only hours, but they shaped political memory. Guests carried stories of them to other cities. A ruler who could command light, sound, movement, and illusion appeared to command the world itself. Leonardo designed costumes, mechanical devices, scenery, and elaborate entertainments. For a celebration connected to the marriage of John Galeazzo Sforza and Isabella of Aragon, he helped create a spectacle often called the Feast of Paradise. The machinery represented the heavens. Planets and mythological figures moved through a constructed cosmos. Imagine the effect in an age before cinema, electric light, or digital projection. A hall darkens. Music begins. The stars seem to move. Figures descend. A court watches the universe appear under the direction of one man. The spectacle vanishes when the celebration ends. But for Leonardo, it offered a rare satisfaction. Temporary art could be complete precisely because no one expected it to last. Its purpose was transformation. Its material was the audience's astonishment. These court designs also sharpened his understanding of movement. He studied pulleys, counterweights, gears, and concealed mechanisms. He learned how bodies moved through stage space. He observed how emotion could be directed by light and timing. Later, when he painted a room full of men reacting to a single sentence, he would draw upon the same instincts. But before that masterpiece, Ludovico gave him a project of almost impossible scale. The Duke wanted a monumental equestrian statue honoring his father, Francesco Sforza. Italy already possessed celebrated bronze horsemen. Donatello's Gattamelata stood in Padua. Verrocchio was creating the monument to Bartolomeo Colleoni for Venice. Ludovico wanted something greater. Leonardo planned a horse of unprecedented size. The technical challenge was enormous. A full-scale bronze horse required knowledge of anatomy, balance, mold-making, metal flow, furnace control, and structural stability. A failure during casting could destroy years of work and consume a fortune. Leonardo began studying horses with obsessive care. He visited stables. He measured limbs. He drew muscles, tendons, hooves, nostrils, and heads. He searched for an animal powerful enough to represent dynastic authority, but alive enough to avoid becoming a rigid symbol. Early designs may have shown the horse rearing over a fallen enemy, a daring composition that would have created severe balance problems. Later plans became more stable, but the scale remained immense. For years, the monument hovered between promise and reality. By the early 1490s, Leonardo had produced a full-sized clay model. Contemporary observers were astonished. The great horse stood in Milan like a creature waiting to be transformed into metal. The bronze was prepared. The molds were studied. The city anticipated a monument that would proclaim the Sforza name for centuries. Then politics intervened. Italy was moving toward catastrophe. Ludovico Sforza had strengthened his power by inviting forces he believed he could control. In the struggle over Naples and Milan, foreign monarchies were drawn into the peninsula. The French King Charles VIII crossed into Italy in 1494 with an army and powerful artillery. The invasion revealed how vulnerable the Italian states had become. Fortifications that had resisted older siege methods could be shattered by mobile cannon. Alliances collapsed. Rulers fled. Cities negotiated or surrendered. The balance of power that had seemed intricate and stable began to break apart. The bronze intended for Leonardo's horse was redirected toward weapons. A statue designed to immortalize military glory was sacrificed to the immediate needs of war. Leonardo's masterpiece would never be cast. The clay model remained, and in time, invading soldiers would use it for target practice. Few episodes capture Leonardo's career more cruelly. He had solved problems no sculptor had faced at that scale. He had studied the animal for years. He had created a model capable of overwhelming viewers. But history did not care that the design was beautiful. Bronze could become canon. Canon could defend a dynasty. And a dynasty under threat had no use for a dream waiting in clay. Yet before Milan fell, Leonardo would create a different work for Ludovico's circle. It would not require thousands of pounds of bronze. It would cover a dining hall wall. And although it began to decay within Leonardo's lifetime, it would become one of the most reproduced images ever made. The commission came from the Dominican convent of Santa Maria del Grazie, where Ludovico was turning the church and monastery into a center of Sforza memory. In the refectory, the room where the monks ate, Leonardo was asked to paint the Last Supper. The subject had been painted many times. Christ sits with his disciples on the night before the crucifixion. Bread and wine are shared. Judas will betray him. The future is already moving toward violence. A conventional artist might have arranged the figures calmly along a table, identifying Judas through a separate position or obvious symbol. Leonardo chose a more dangerous instant. He painted the moment after Christ says that one of them will betray him. The sentence has been spoken. The room has not yet recovered. Every apostle reacts. The painting became an anatomy of shock. And Leonardo would need every lesson he had learned about faces, gestures, theater, perspective, and human behavior to make it work. The dining hall at Santa Maria del Grazie was long and rectangular. Monks entered to eat in silence while listening to scripture. At one end of the room, Leonardo's painted table appeared to continue the real space. The architecture inside the image leads the eye toward Christ. Lines in the walls and ceiling converge behind his head. A window opens onto a distant landscape. His body forms a stable triangle at the center while emotion breaks around him. The apostles are arranged in groups of 3, but no group remains still. Some lean toward Christ. Some pull away. Some demand an explanation. Some search the faces beside them. Hands rise, point, twist, and strike the table. Peter moves with fierce urgency. John seems overcome. Thomas lifts a finger, a gesture that will later echo the wound he demands to see after the resurrection. Philip draws his hands toward his chest as if asking whether he could be the betrayer. Judas remains within the group rather than isolated on the far side of the table. He recoils into shadow, clutching the purse associated with his betrayal. His hand moves toward the same dish as Christ's. The tragedy is not hidden, but it is not simplified. Judas is still one of them. That makes the betrayal more disturbing. Leonardo had long studied what he called the motions of the mind. He believed the body revealed inner states. A painter who understood emotion could show thought through posture and gesture before a viewer consciously interpreted the face. The Last Supper became the supreme demonstration of that belief. The apostles do not pose. They respond. The image captures several seconds at once, as if the words travel outward from Christ in waves. The nearest reactions are immediate. Others are delayed by confusion. The entire table becomes a human chain of consequence. At the center, Christ remains isolated. His hands extend toward bread and wine. His head is calm, but not untouched by sorrow. The opening behind him creates a natural halo without relying on a flat golden disc. Outside lies a serene landscape, almost impossibly distant from the emotional storm inside the room. This contrast gives the painting its power. Chaos surrounds the man who already understands what must happen. Leonardo worked on the mural during the 1490s, probably over several years. Witnesses later described his unpredictable rhythm. Some days he painted from dawn until darkness without stopping to eat. On other days he stood before the wall for hours, made a few strokes, and left. At times he reportedly walked across the city simply to look at the painting, alter a single detail, and depart. To the prior responsible for the convent, such behavior could appear like delay. To Leonardo, looking was part of the work. He was not filling a wall. He was deciding how a thought becomes visible. But his method contained a fatal weakness. Traditional fresco required pigment to be applied rapidly onto wet plaster. As the plaster dried, color became chemically bound to the wall. The technique was durable, but it demanded speed. Leonardo wanted the slow transitions, subtle shadows, and revisions possible in panel painting. So he experimented. He applied tempera and oil-like mixtures onto a prepared dry surface. This allowed extraordinary detail and tonal control. It also failed. Moisture entered the wall. The paint did not bond securely. Within years, observers noticed deterioration. By the middle of the 16th century, the image was already described as damaged. Then came centuries of additional harm. A doorway was cut through the lower center, destroying Christ's feet. The room was used for other purposes. Restorers added paint. Humidity, war, neglect, and well-intentioned intervention altered the surface. During the Second World War, bombing destroyed parts of the convent, though the wall containing the painting survived behind protective supports. The Last Supper we see today is not a perfectly preserved window into the 1490s. It is a wounded survivor. Yet the composition remains stronger than the material. Copies, engravings, descriptions, and the surviving image carried Leonardo's idea across the world. This is one of the great paradoxes of his life. He wanted to defeat time through knowledge. But some of his greatest works survived only because their ideas were more durable than their surfaces. While painting The Last Supper, Leonardo was not focused on art alone. His Milanese notebooks expanded into studies of mechanics, geometry, optics, architecture, weaponry, water, and the human body. The city gave him access to skilled craftsmen and intellectual companions. One of the most important was the mathematician Luca Pacioli. Pacioli was a Franciscan friar and scholar who wrote on arithmetic, geometry, and proportion. Leonardo illustrated solid geometric forms for Pacioli's work on divine proportion. The drawings show transparent polyhedra suspended in space, their internal structures made visible. For Leonardo, geometry was not abstract decoration. It was a language beneath appearances. A face could be measured. A building could be harmonized. A force could be diagrammed. A body could be understood through proportion. This interest helped produce one of his most recognized images, the drawing commonly called Vitruvian Man. A nude male figure stands in two overlapping positions, arms and legs extended, fitted within a circle and a square. Notes around the drawing refer to the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius, who described relationships between the proportions of the human body and ideal architectural forms. The image is often reproduced as a simple symbol of Renaissance humanism, man at the center of the universe. But Leonardo's drawing is more precise and more interesting than that slogan. He tested Vitruvius against observation. He measured actual bodies. He adjusted relationships. The circle and square do not share the same center. The navel organizes the circle. The lower body organizes the square. The figure must move to inhabit both. The human being is not frozen inside geometry. He becomes the bridge between forms. The drawing reflects a central Renaissance hope that nature, mathematics, art, and the human body might belong to one intelligible order. Yet Leonardo never accepted order too easily. He also drew grotesque faces, aging skin, distorted profiles, storms, battles, and catastrophic floods. He knew that nature produced irregularity as readily as harmony. Beauty and destruction came from the same forces. Water nourished cities. Water also erased them. Muscles created graceful movement. Muscles also twisted faces in pain. A horse embodied nobility. A horse could trample a dying soldier. Leonardo's imagination held these opposites together. That is why his peaceful paintings often contain unsettling landscapes. The earth behind his figures is never entirely safe. It has existed longer than human ambition and will continue after it. His studies of the body became especially intense. Anatomy was not forbidden in the simple way later myths sometimes claim. Medical schools had long used dissection under regulated circumstances, and artists studied bodies for practical reasons. But access could be limited, preservation was difficult, and the work was physically and emotionally demanding. Leonardo approached it with extraordinary seriousness. His earliest anatomical interests focused on surface form, how muscles shaped shoulders, necks, hands, and faces. Over time, he went deeper. He dissected human corpses and animals. He separated layers. He traced nerves, vessels, tendons, and organs. He drew bones from multiple views. He sawed skulls and represented their internal cavities through sections that resemble modern technical illustration. He injected wax into structures to preserve their form. He compared the human heart with the hearts of animals. He investigated pregnancy, old age, breathing, digestion, movement, and the senses. The conditions were harsh. Bodies decomposed quickly. Winter made the work more manageable, but there was no refrigeration, no modern antiseptic practice, and no bright surgical lighting. Leonardo often worked by lamplight, surrounded by odor, dampness, and the knowledge that every specimen had once been a living person. In one note, he described dissecting an old man who had died peacefully in a hospital. Leonardo had spoken with him shortly before death. The man said he felt no illness, only weakness. Afterward, Leonardo examined the body to search for the cause. He found changes in the vessels and organs that he associated with age. The episode is striking because Leonardo did not treat the dead man as an anonymous object. He remembered the conversation. He connected the life to the anatomy. The body was a machine, but never only a machine. Leonardo's drawings of the shoulder, spine, hand, and skull are among the finest anatomical studies of the period. He used exploded views, cross-sections, transparent layers, and sequential diagrams. He was inventing ways to show what a single eye could never see at once. A muscle hidden beneath another muscle could be drawn separately. A skull could appear whole and cut open on the same page. A limb could be shown from several angles. The purpose was understanding, not merely beauty. Yet beauty emerged from understanding. His notes reveal both brilliant insight and inherited error. He learned from ancient authorities such as Galen, whose descriptions were based partly on animal anatomy. Leonardo corrected some traditional claims through direct observation, but he also retained ideas that modern medicine rejects. He sometimes combined what he saw with what he expected to see. Even a genius cannot step completely outside his time, but he could push against it. One of his most advanced investigations concerned the heart. Leonardo studied valves, blood flow, and the spiral motion of fluid. Using models and careful reasoning, he came close to understanding how eddies in the aortic root help close the valve leaflets. Modern experiments have confirmed the importance of flow patterns he observed centuries before advanced imaging. Yet he did not discover the full circulation of blood as William Harvey would later describe it. Leonardo stood at the edge of a new understanding. He could see pieces of the system. He could not assemble all of them within the framework available to him. This happened repeatedly. He imagined parachute-like devices without modern fabric. He designed flying mechanisms without engines light enough to power them. He studied friction without developing a published mathematical theory that could influence later engineering. He drew machines that resembled later inventions, but resemblance is not the same as practical invention. A sketch of an armored vehicle does not mean a functioning tank existed in Renaissance Milan. A drawing of a screw-shaped aerial device does not mean Leonardo built a helicopter. The truth is more impressive than the exaggeration. He recognized problems before the technology existed to solve them. He used analogy, experiment, and drawing to explore possible answers. He understood that flight required lift, balance, control, and a careful relationship between weight and air. At first, he focused on machines powered by human muscles. He studied birds and designed flapping wings. But the human body could not provide enough power for such devices at the required scale. Gradually, Leonardo's attention shifted toward gliding. He examined air currents, centers of gravity, and wing forms. Some of his late concepts moved closer to workable principles, though there is no reliable evidence that he achieved sustained human flight. The dream remained unfinished. Still, imagine the persistence required. He watched birds for years. He drew feathers and joints. He asked how a bird rises against the wind, how it turns, how it descends, and how the tail stabilizes motion. He did not accept flight as magic. He believed it had causes. And if those causes could be understood, perhaps a human being could enter the sky. That belief was one of the defining impulses of the Renaissance. Nature was not a closed book reserved for divine secrets. It could be read. But Leonardo's most dangerous years were approaching. The court that financed his investigations was built on unstable power. Ludovico Sforza had used diplomacy and foreign intervention to strengthen his position. Now those same forces were turning against him. In 1498, the French king Charles VIII died. His successor, Louis XII, claimed Milan through his family line and prepared to take it. In 1499, French forces invaded the duchy. Ludovico's alliances failed. Milan opened its gates. The ruler who had sponsored Leonardo's horse, spectacles, engineering, and paintings fled. The great clay model was left exposed. The court scattered. Leonardo, now nearly 50, had spent almost 2 decades building a place for himself in Milan. Suddenly, that world disappeared. He gathered notebooks, drawings, and possessions. He did not know where permanent safety could be found. And the next patron he served would reveal the darkest side of Renaissance ambition. Leonardo was about to enter the orbit of Cesare Borgia. Leonardo left Milan in December 1499 with his friend, the mathematician Luca Pacioli, and members of his household. The journey marked more than a change of city. It marked the collapse of an identity he had spent years constructing. In Milan, he had been court artist, engineer, festival designer, anatomist, and trusted creator of wonders. Now he was once again a man carrying unfinished work through a country at war. He first passed through Mantua, where Isabella d'Este ruled one of the most sophisticated courts in Italy. Isabella was intelligent, politically alert, and determined to build a collection that would display her taste. She wanted works by the leading artists of the age, and Leonardo's presence immediately attracted her attention. He made a striking portrait drawing of her in profile. The image combines authority and restraint. Isabella's head turns with formal dignity, but the hands begin to suggest movement and personality. She wanted a painted portrait. She wrote repeatedly. Leonardo did not deliver one. The pattern was now familiar. Patrons desired the finished image. Leonardo's interest moved elsewhere. From Mantua, he traveled to Venice, a maritime republic facing military danger from the Ottoman Empire. Venice lived by water and feared invasion through water. Leonardo offered engineering advice. He considered defensive barriers, diving equipment, and methods of attacking ships from below. Some of these designs were speculative. Some drew upon existing ideas. All reveal the same mind asking how an environment could become a weapon. In the lagoons, water protected Venice. In the hands of an enemy, water could become the path of destruction. Leonardo had studied currents for beauty and knowledge. Now rulers wanted to know how currents might kill. This tension never disappeared from his career. His notebooks contained designs for weapons of terrifying efficiency, multi-barreled guns, giant crossbows, fortified vehicles, explosives, and mechanisms intended to break formations. At the same time, he wrote with compassion about animals, described war as a kind of bestial madness, and painted faces of extraordinary tenderness. Was he a pacifist forced to survive through military service? Was he an engineer fascinated by force regardless of its use? The evidence does not permit a simple answer. Leonardo lived in a world where art, architecture, and warfare were often financed by the same men. A duke who commissioned a chapel might also order cannon. An engineer who designed canals might be asked to flood an enemy position. Knowledge was never innocent simply because it was beautiful. After Venice, Leonardo returned briefly to Florence in 1500. The city he had left nearly 2 decades earlier had changed dramatically. Lorenzo de' Medici was dead. The Medici had been expelled in 1494. The fiery preacher Girolamo Savonarola had risen to influence, denouncing luxury, corruption, and moral decay. Under his movement, objects associated with vanity were burned in the famous bonfires. Then Savonarola himself was arrested, tortured, condemned, and executed in the Piazza della Signoria in 1498. Florence had become a republic again, but it was tense, divided, and threatened by war. Leonardo returned not as an apprentice, but as a celebrated master. Artists and patrons gathered to see his work. He displayed a large cartoon for a composition of the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne. Contemporary witnesses described crowds coming to admire it. The figures formed a complex knot of affection and movement, generations linked through bodies that turn, lean, restrain, and release. The scene looked gentle. Its design was the result of years of searching. Leonardo repeatedly revised the relationship among Mary, Christ, Saint Anne, and the Lamb. He treated the family group almost like a living machine, each gesture transferring emotion into the next. Mary reaches toward the child. The child reaches toward the lamb, a symbol of sacrifice, and watches with a calm that can be read as wisdom, sorrow, or acceptance. The entire future of the story is contained inside a moment of play. Leonardo was now capable of creating images that seemed inevitable, even when the process behind them was painfully uncertain. But Florence could not hold him for long. In 1502, he entered the service of Cesare Borgia. Cesare was the son of Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia. He had been a cardinal, but abandoned the church career arranged for him and turned toward conquest. Backed by papal authority, French support, money, and ruthless calculation, he carved out territories in central Italy. Cities surrendered before him. Rivals disappeared. Allies were used and discarded. The court around him moved with danger. Leonardo joined him as a military architect and general engineer. The appointment may seem shocking to those who see Leonardo only as the painter of calm smiles. But Cesare offered access to fortresses, rivers, terrain, and large-scale problems. He also offered payment and authority. Leonardo traveled through Romagna and the Marches, inspecting defenses, surveying routes, and producing maps. These journeys transformed his understanding of landscape. A painter might represent a city from a single viewpoint. A military engineer needed to understand it from above. Leonardo created an extraordinary map of Imola that appears almost modern in its clarity. Streets, walls, towers, and surrounding terrain are organized within a measured circular plan. The viewpoint is impossible for a person standing on the ground. Leonardo constructed it through surveying and geometry. He turned the city into information. For Cesare, such a map could reveal weak points and routes of control. For history, it demonstrates Leonardo's ability to move between observation and abstraction. A city had two realities. One was the lived experience of alleys, doors, noise, and crowds. The other was the silent structure seen from nowhere and everywhere at once. Modern maps make this perspective ordinary. In Leonardo's hands, it was revolutionary. During this period, Leonardo likely encountered Niccolò Machiavelli, a Florentine official involved in diplomatic and military affairs. The two men would later be connected to an ambitious engineering plan, though the nature of their personal relationship remains uncertain. Machiavelli studied political power through history and human behavior. Leonardo studied physical power through movement and form. Both served governments that could admire intelligence while using it for violent ends. Both understood that ideal plans often collapse when confronted by fear, ambition, and fortune. Cesare Borgia's power reached its most chilling expression at Senigallia in late 1502. Several captains who had rebelled against him were lured into a meeting and seized. Some were strangled. Machiavelli observed the political brilliance of the trap with cold attention. Leonardo was in Borgia's service around this time, though there is no evidence that he planned or participated in the killings. Still, he could not have ignored the atmosphere. A man who designed fortresses for Cesare was working for a ruler who treated trust as a weapon. Then Cesare's fortune changed. Pope Alexander VI died in 1503. Without his father's protection, Cesare's network began to collapse. Enemies returned. Alliances dissolved. The ruthless prince who had seemed unstoppable became vulnerable with astonishing speed. Leonardo left his service. Once again, a powerful patron's world had failed beneath him. He returned to Florence carrying new knowledge of maps, rivers, fortifications, and the machinery of political conquest. The city now gave him one of the most important commissions of his life, and it placed him in direct competition with a younger artist whose personality could hardly have been more different. Michelangelo Buonarroti was 23 years younger than Leonardo. He was intense, proud, physically rough in manner, and passionately devoted to sculpture. Where Leonardo moved through courts with elegance, Michelangelo cultivated the image of the solitary worker covered in marble dust. Where Leonardo revised endlessly across many disciplines, Michelangelo attacked massive tasks with ferocious concentration. Both men were celebrated. Both were difficult. Neither admired the other. Florence decided to place their work in the same political chamber. The great council hall in the Palazzo Vecchio needed enormous murals celebrating Florentine victories. Leonardo received the commission to paint the Battle of Anghiari. Michelangelo was assigned the Battle of Cassina. The hall would become a contest between the two greatest artists of the age. Crowds studied their preparatory drawings. Younger artists copied them. Each master approached work differently. Michelangelo focused on nude soldiers surprised while bathing, bodies twisting as they rushed toward combat. Leonardo focused on the violence of battle itself. His central scene, known through copies, showed mounted warriors fighting over a standard. Men grimaced with rage. Horses bit and collided. Faces became almost animal. Muscles, cloth, weapons, and reins formed a knot of aggression. This was not a clean image of patriotic glory. It was human fury made visible. Leonardo had long studied grotesque expressions and the behavior of horses. In the Battle of Anghiari, those studies converged. The riders and animals reflect one another. Civilization seems to disappear beneath the pressure of violence. History remembers the title as a Florentine victory. Leonardo painted the cost inside the victory. But once again, technique betrayed him. Unwilling to use true fresco, he experimented with methods that would allow slow working and rich effects. According to later reports, he attempted to dry the surface with heat. The upper part did not respond as hoped. Paint ran or failed to set properly. The mural remained incomplete. Michelangelo also failed to finish his wall, leaving Florence for other work. The grand duel ended with two abandoned masterpieces known largely through copies and descriptions. It is difficult to imagine a more fitting Renaissance failure. The city had gathered two giants to immortalize military triumph. Instead, it received fragments. Yet those fragments influenced generations. Artists studied the cartoons until they deteriorated or disappeared. The unfinished visions became schools of movement, anatomy, and emotional force. Completion was not the only form of power. While Leonardo worked on the battle mural, he began painting a portrait that would follow him for the rest of his life. The sitter was most likely Lisa Gherardini, the wife of the Florentine merchant Francesco del Giocondo. She was not a queen, a duchess, or a legendary beauty. She belonged to a respectable merchant family and had married into another. The commission may have been connected to a new home, the birth of a child, or a family event. The precise circumstances remain debated. Leonardo transformed the portrait into something no ordinary commission could contain. Lisa sits behind a parapet, her hands folded, her body turned slightly while her face addresses the viewer. Behind her stretches a landscape of winding roads, water, rock, and distant mountains. The world seems to rise on different levels behind each shoulder, creating a subtle instability. Her clothing is dark and restrained. There is no obvious jewelry. Nothing distracts from the face and hands. And then there is the smile. It is not broad. It is not fixed. It appears, weakens, and returns depending on where the viewer looks. Leonardo understood that vision is not uniform. The center of the eye sees detail differently from the edges. By softening the corners of the mouth and surrounding them with delicate shadows, he made the expression less stable when viewed directly and more apparent in peripheral vision. The smile seems to move because the viewer's own perception is moving. But technique alone does not explain its hold. The face contains no single emotion. Warmth and distance coexist. Recognition and secrecy coexist. She looks present, yet unreachable. This emotional ambiguity made the portrait feel alive in a way that ideal beauty could not. Leonardo worked on the painting over many years. He never delivered it to the Giocondo family, at least not as far as the surviving evidence indicates. He carried it from Florence to Milan, from Milan to Rome, and eventually across the Alps into France. Why? Perhaps the portrait became an experimental surface on which he continued refining color, atmosphere, and expression. Perhaps he felt it was never finished. Perhaps he simply valued it too deeply to release. The woman who began as a merchant's wife became the companion of an aging artist. Later history renamed her through the Italian title La Gioconda and the French La Joconde. In English, she became the Mona Lisa, with Mona derived from a form of Madonna, meaning My Lady. Her modern fame was not immediate. The painting was admired, but it did not become the most famous artwork in the world during Leonardo's lifetime. That status grew through royal ownership, museum display, reproduction, criticism, and a sensational theft in the 20th century. The global icon came later. Leonardo's achievement came first. He had painted not simply a likeness, but the experience of encountering another consciousness. And the more closely the world looked, the less certain it became. The portrait was only one current inside Leonardo's Florentine years. At the same time, he was attempting to redirect a river. Florence had long struggled against Pisa, a rival city whose access to the sea depended upon the Arno. Florentine leaders considered altering the river's course as a military strategy. If the Arno could be diverted away from Pisa, the city might be weakened without a direct assault. Leonardo became involved in the plan, working within a political environment that included Machiavelli. The idea was audacious. It was also far larger than a drawing. Thousands of laborers would need to excavate channels through difficult ground. Water levels, soil, gradients, seasonal flow, and the stability of embankments had to be understood. Leonardo surveyed terrain and produced designs. He also imagined broader canal systems that might improve trade between Florence and the sea. The project began, but the excavation was poorly managed. Contractors and officials altered plans. Rain and soil created problems. The channel did not achieve its purpose. Work stopped. Pisa was not defeated by Leonardo's river. Again, the gap between concept and execution swallowed the dream. But Leonardo's studies of the Arno were not wasted. He mapped valleys, examined erosion, and deepened his understanding of water as a force that shaped civilization and landscape. Water obsessed him. He called it the vehicle of nature. He drew its surface as curling hair. He studied drops striking pools, currents colliding, waves reflecting, sediment moving, and obstacles creating vortices. He compared rivers to blood vessels and the earth to a living body. The analogy was not merely poetic. He believed similar laws might govern different scales of nature. The branching of streams resembled the branching of veins. The movement of air resembled the movement of water. The spiral in a whirlpool resembled the spiral of hair. A small pattern could reveal a larger one. This search for unity gave his notebooks their astonishing range. But it could also lead him into error. The earth is not literally a human body. Rivers do not pulse exactly like arteries. Analogy can illuminate, but it can also mislead. Leonardo's genius did not come from never being wrong. It came from looking closely enough to be wrong in productive ways. He returned to questions. He revised. He crossed out. He tested one model against another. He rarely treated an inherited claim as final. His studies of fossils reveal this independence. Shells and marine remains had been found in mountain rocks. Some people explained them through the biblical flood. Others suggested that strange forms had grown within stone. Leonardo rejected easy explanations. He observed that the fossils occurred in layers and included delicate structures that would not have survived being violently carried into the mountains by a single universal flood. He reasoned that seas had once covered regions now raised above water, and that geological change occurred over vast periods. He did not possess modern plate tectonics, evolutionary biology, or a scientific system of deep time. Yet he understood that the Earth's history was longer and more complex than a simple catastrophe. The landscape behind the Mona Lisa reflects this geological imagination. The rocks appear eroded, ancient, and almost beyond human scale. Roads and bridges suggest civilization, but they are tiny against the forces that shaped the valleys. The woman's face is immediate. The world behind her is immeasurably old. Leonardo's portraits feel timeless partly because time itself is present within them. During these years, his household included assistants and pupils who shaped both his work and his personal life. The most notorious was John Giacomo Caprati, known as Salai, a nickname meaning something like Little Devil. Salai entered Leonardo's household as a boy in 1490. Leonardo's notes describe him stealing money, lying, overeating, and creating trouble. Yet Salai remained connected to him for decades. He became a model, assistant, and painter in his own right, though the quality and attribution of works associated with him remain debated. Their relationship has inspired speculation, including claims of romance, but the evidence is inconclusive. What is certain is that Leonardo tolerated behavior from Salai that might have driven another master to expel him. Perhaps he saw charm inside the disorder. Perhaps affection outweighed irritation. Perhaps the household, like the notebooks, was less orderly than the legend of perfect genius suggests. Another assistant, Francesco Melzi, entered Leonardo's life later and became deeply important. Melzi came from a noble Milanese family. He was educated, loyal, and capable of understanding the master's intellectual ambitions. Where Salai was unpredictable, Melzi appears to have offered stability. He would remain with Leonardo in France and inherit most of the notebooks. Without Melzi, even more of Leonardo's work might have disappeared. The master did not work alone. Assistants prepared panels, copied designs, mixed materials, arranged travel, and participated in paintings. Some works from Leonardo's circle are difficult to attribute because the studio could begin from his drawings while several hands completed the surface. The modern desire for a pure object touched only by the genius does not fit the Renaissance workshop. Leonardo was singular. His work was also collaborative. In 1506, his Florentine period was interrupted by an invitation from Milan. The city was now under French control. Charles d'Amboise, the French governor, admired Leonardo and wanted his service. King Louis XII also valued him. Florence reluctantly allowed Leonardo to leave temporarily, expecting him to return and complete the Battle of Anghiari. He did not return to finish it. Milan drew him back. The city had changed rulers, but the questions remained. Leonardo entered a new network of French patronage and worked on painting, architecture, engineering, and courtly projects. He advised on canals and perhaps on plans for royal residences. He continued developing the composition of Saint and revising other works. Most importantly, he returned with renewed intensity to anatomy. In Milan, he collaborated with Marcantonio della Torre, a young professor of anatomy at the University of Pavia. Marcantonio possessed formal medical knowledge. Leonardo possessed unmatched visual intelligence and practical experience in dissection. Together, they may have planned a comprehensive anatomical treatise. This could have changed the history of medicine. Leonardo's drawings were clearer than almost anything produced before them. If organized, printed, and distributed, they might have influenced anatomists across Europe decades before the work of Andreas Vesalius. But the treatise was never published. Marcantonio died young, probably during an outbreak of plague, around 1511. The collaboration ended. Leonardo's pages remained private. This is one of the greatest lost opportunities in intellectual history. He had accumulated discoveries, methods, and images that could have reached other minds. Instead, they stayed scattered in notebooks. Why did he not publish? The answer cannot be reduced to one flaw. Printing complex illustrations was expensive and technically demanding. His notes were disorganized. His ideas were constantly changing. Latin posed difficulties. Patronage obligations interrupted him. He may have imagined a perfect synthesis that became impossible to complete. But the consequence was clear. Knowledge not shared could not become a foundation for others. Leonardo often arrived before the future. Then he failed to build the bridge that would allow the future to reach him. His anatomical studies from this period include extraordinary drawings of the spine, the fetus in the womb, the heart, the brain, and the reproductive system. Some contain errors based on animal dissection or ancient theory. Others are startlingly accurate. His image of a fetus curled within the uterus is among the most famous. It combines tenderness, scientific curiosity, and the limitations of available specimens. Certain details appear drawn from the dissection of a cow rather than a human pregnancy, showing how observation from different bodies could become merged. Yet the central question is unmistakable. How does life begin within life? Leonardo had painted Mary and Christ many times. In anatomy, motherhood became a physical mystery as well as a sacred one. He wanted to understand how the fetus was nourished, how it breathed before birth, how the membranes formed, and how the body emerged into the world. His answers were incomplete. His attention was profound. The same is true of his studies of the brain and senses. Medieval and ancient theories located mental faculties within chambers of the brain. Leonardo investigated the optic nerves and cranial cavities, even injecting wax to model internal spaces. He was searching for the point where perception became understanding. Where does the image seen by the eye become thought? Where does memory reside? How does the soul move the body? He could draw nerves. He could not draw consciousness. The closer he came to the machinery of the body, the more mysterious life became. This was not failure in the ordinary sense. It was the beginning of a modern problem. Leonardo believed direct observation could reveal nature, but he also learned that every answer opened a deeper question. A muscle could be exposed. The intention that moved the muscle could not. The eye could be dissected. The experience of sight remained invisible. The heart could be cut open. The meaning people gave to love, courage, and grief could not be found inside its chambers. His art and science met at this boundary. Painting represented the visible signs of invisible life. Anatomy revealed the structures beneath those signs. Neither alone was enough. Around this time, Leonardo continued working on the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne. The final painting shows Saint Anne seated behind her daughter Mary, who leans forward to restrain the young Christ as he embraces a lamb. The figures form a flowing pyramid, but the emotional movement is more complex than the geometry. Christ plays with the animal that represents his future sacrifice. Mary smiles, yet her body reaches to pull him back, and watches, calm and knowing. One generation understands what another tries to prevent. The landscape behind them is rugged and distant. The figures seem close enough to touch, but the world opens behind them into a strange, ancient expanse. Leonardo's soft transitions make flesh, cloth, rock, and atmosphere feel connected. The painting is gentle, but the story beneath it is tragic. A mother cannot stop the future. That tension may explain why Leonardo returned to the composition repeatedly. He was not simply arranging bodies. He was painting acceptance and resistance at the same time. His later works became increasingly difficult to separate from his personal meditation on time. Faces emerge from darkness. Gestures point beyond the visible. Landscapes appear as if the world were still forming. This is especially true of Saint John the Baptist. The young saint appears against a nearly black background. His face and bare shoulder emerge through soft light. He smiles with an ambiguity that recalls the Mona Lisa. One hand crosses his chest. The other rises, pointing upward. The gesture is simple. Its meaning is not. John points toward heaven, toward Christ, toward revelation, or toward something beyond the painting. His body seems both human and unreal, sensual and spiritual, present and dissolving. Some viewers have found the image beautiful. Others have found it disturbing. Leonardo was no longer interested in giving certainty. He was painting the threshold between seen and unseen. Meanwhile, war returned. The French hold over Milan weakened as rival powers formed alliances. In 1512, Swiss forces helped restore the Sforza dynasty. French authority collapsed. Leonardo's patrons were displaced. Once again, Milan became unsafe. Once again, he had to leave. He was 60 years old. He had spent decades serving courts that vanished, rulers who fled, and political orders that reversed themselves. Florence had not held him. Milan had fallen twice. Cesare Borgia had collapsed. Projects had been abandoned from Tuscany to Lombardy. Now Leonardo turned toward Rome. The city was entering one of the most extraordinary artistic periods in European history. Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Raphael was transforming papal apartments. Ancient statues were being excavated and celebrated. Power, money, religion, and art converged at the center of the Catholic world. It should have been Leonardo's greatest stage. Instead, Rome would make him feel old. Leonardo arrived in Rome in late 1513 under the protection of Giuliano de' Medici, brother of Pope Leo X. The Medici had returned to power in Florence, and now a Medici pope ruled from the Vatican. Giuliano provided Leonardo with rooms in the Belvedere complex and a monthly allowance. On paper, the situation seemed secure. Rome offered ancient ruins, wealthy patrons, learned circles, and access to the papal court. Yet Leonardo found himself strangely displaced. Michelangelo, whom he had faced in Florence, had completed the great ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in 1512. The work covered the vault with monumental bodies, prophets, ancestors, and scenes from Genesis. Raphael, younger still, led a thriving workshop and painted elegant frescoes for the papal apartments. The center of artistic gravity had shifted. Leonardo was revered, but reverence could feel like distance. He was the legendary master from an earlier generation, admired for what he had done and questioned for what he had failed to finish. He did not receive a major papal painting commission comparable to the work given to Michelangelo or Raphael. Instead, he pursued experiments. He studied mirrors, optics, geometry, water, and machinery. He continued anatomical work for a time, but according to a surviving note, a German mirror maker living near him caused difficulties by reporting his dissections. The exact circumstances are uncertain, and Leonardo's own account may reflect frustration or suspicion. What seems clear is that his access to bodies became restricted. For a man whose knowledge depended on direct investigation, restriction felt like blindness. He experimented with oils, varnishes, and chemical processes. Assistants worked around him. Visitors came to see the famous master. But Rome did not become the new Milan he may have hoped for. One story from the period captures the gap between Leonardo and the court. Pope Leo X reportedly heard that Leonardo was preparing varnishes before beginning a painting and remarked that the artist would accomplish nothing because he thought about the end before beginning the work. The anecdote may have been sharpened by later retelling. Still, it expresses the criticism that followed Leonardo everywhere. He prepared endlessly. He investigated every condition. He sought control over the final surface before the first stroke. And sometimes the preparation consumed the work itself. Yet this criticism can be turned around. Leonardo did think about the end before the beginning. He understood that materials age, walls absorb moisture, metal contracts, light changes, and bodies decay. He had watched paintings fail and monuments vanish. He knew that creation existed inside time. His caution was not foolish. But no knowledge could eliminate risk. The attempt to guarantee perfection often prevented completion. Rome also brought him face to face with new political realities. The Italian wars had drawn France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, the papacy, Venice, Milan, Florence, and other powers into shifting conflict. The peninsula that had nurtured Renaissance culture became a battlefield for larger monarchies. Artists moved with armies and patrons. Ancient ideals coexisted with gunpowder. Popes commissioned sacred art while negotiating military alliances. Leonardo had spent his life inside this contradiction. By now, he may have understood that no Italian court could offer lasting peace. Then the balance changed again. In 1515, the young French King Francis I crossed the Alps and defeated Swiss forces at the Battle of Marignano. France regained control of Milan. Francis was only in his early 20s, ambitious, cultivated, and eager to present himself as a Renaissance monarch. He admired Leonardo. The invitation that followed offered something the aging master had rarely received, not merely a commission, but a place of honor. In 1516, Leonardo left Italy for France. He traveled across the Alps with Francesco Melzi, Salai for at least part of the transition, servants, notebooks, and paintings. The journey would have been difficult for a man in his mid-60s. Mountain roads were dangerous. Weather could change quickly. Pack animals carried precious objects through narrow passes. Among the works Leonardo brought were the Mona Lisa, St. John the Baptist, and the Virgin and Child with St. Anne. He had abandoned frescoes and monuments. These paintings he refused to abandon. France became his final home. Francis I installed him at the manor of Clou, now known as Clos-Luce, near the royal chateau of Amboise in the Loire Valley. Leonardo received the title of first painter, engineer, and architect to the king, along with a generous pension. The position was broad and symbolic. Francis did not demand a rapid stream of finished paintings. He valued Leonardo's presence, conversation, designs, and prestige. For perhaps the first time, Leonardo was treated less like a craftsman under contract and more like a living treasury of knowledge. The young king and the old master became associated in later memory. Romantic stories claimed Francis held Leonardo in his arms at the moment of death. That scene was popularized by paintings and biography, but Francis was likely elsewhere when Leonardo died. The legend is probably false. The respect behind it was real. Leonardo advised on architecture, canals, court spectacles, and royal plans. He may have developed designs related to a vast palace project at Romorantin, where Francis considered establishing a new royal center. Leonardo imagined water systems, streets, stables, gardens, and buildings integrated into a planned environment. Once again, he saw beyond a single structure. A palace was connected to drainage. Drainage was connected to rivers. Rivers were connected to transport. Transport was connected to the life of a city. He designed systems. The grand project was never realized as he imagined it. But his French years were not defined only by another abandoned plan. They offered him time to organize, reflect, and share. Francesco Melzi assisted him faithfully. Visitors described Leonardo as physically weakened but mentally active. His right hand may have been impaired by a stroke or related condition, though he could still draw and write to some degree, especially with his left hand. Evidence about the timing and severity is incomplete. He was forced to confront a reality he had spent his life studying in others. The body fails. Muscles lose power. Nerves cease to carry command. Hands that once controlled the smallest transition of shadow begin to tremble or refuse. For Leonardo, this must have been especially cruel. His hand had been the bridge between imagination and the world. Now the bridge was narrowing. Yet he continued to think. He reviewed notebooks. He discussed geometry. He planned festivals. He examined the movement of water. He drew visions of overwhelming storms and floods. These late deluge drawings are among his most haunting works. Mountains seem to break apart. Water spins into vast coils. Clouds collapse into the earth. Buildings and human figures, when present at all, are nearly powerless. The pages do not show one specific biblical scene with simple moral clarity. They show nature becoming total force. All boundaries disappear. Air becomes water. Water becomes stone. Stone becomes dust. The careful systems Leonardo had studied for decades turn catastrophic. Some historians have read these drawings as scientific investigations of turbulence. Others see apocalyptic imagination. They are both. Leonardo knew that the same patterns could appear in a cup, a river, a storm, or the destruction of a world. Scale changed. Law remained. The drawings feel like the final vision of a man who had spent his life trying to understand order and had never forgotten chaos. In France, the paintings he carried continued to evolve. Leonardo likely made adjustments to them over long periods. His method involved thin, translucent layers, subtle glazes, and tiny changes almost impossible to date precisely. He had once painted an angel whose softness distinguished him from his master. Now entire faces seemed formed from breath. The Mona Lisa's skin has no obvious line around it. The lips merge with shadow. The eyes meet the viewer without becoming rigid. The landscape rises behind her as if memory and geology belong to the same atmosphere. St. John emerges from darkness with a finger lifted toward what cannot be painted. Saint and holds generations within one flowing structure while a child embraces the symbol of death. These works were not separate from Leonardo's science. They were its emotional completion. He understood light because he had studied optics. He understood bodies because he had dissected them. He understood landscapes because he had mapped rivers and examined fossils. He understood movement because he had watched water, birds, horses, soldiers, actors, and machines. But knowledge alone did not create the paintings. The mystery came from restraint. Leonardo knew what not to define. A sharp edge gives certainty. A softened edge allows time, memory, and emotion to enter. His paintings remain alive because they do not finish the viewer's thought. In April 1519, Leonardo prepared his will. He named burial wishes, religious observances, gifts, and inheritances. Francesco Melzi received his books, instruments, and drawings. Salai and a servant received property in Milan. Others in his household were remembered. The document reveals a man arranging the physical remains of a life that had resisted arrangement. Notebooks that crossed decades and subjects were placed into human hands. Paintings that had followed him across borders would pass into new collections. Ideas that had never become books would depend upon the loyalty and judgment of heirs. Leonardo died on May 2, 1519. He was buried at the Church of Saint Florentine in Amboise, according to his wishes. The church was later damaged and demolished during the upheavals that transformed France. Remains believed to be his were reinterred in the chapel of Saint Hubert at the chateau, though absolute identification is difficult. Even his grave became uncertain. The man who studied the survival of materials did not receive an undisturbed resting place. After his death, Francis I acquired or inherited access to paintings associated with Leonardo. The Mona Lisa entered the French royal collection and eventually the Louvre. Saint John the Baptist and Saint and also remained in France. Melzi returned to Italy with the notebooks and drawings. For a time, There was hope that Leonardo's intellectual work might be organized. Melzi attempted to compile material on painting, drawing from his master's notes. The text, later known as the Treatise on Painting, emerged through complicated manuscript traditions. But the full body of Leonardo's papers was never published as a coherent whole. After Melzi's death, the collection began to scatter. Sheets were inherited, sold, given away, cut apart, rebound, rearranged, or lost. Collectors valued drawings, but often separated them from the context Leonardo had intended. Notebooks entered libraries and private collections across Europe. Some pages disappeared forever. Some survived by accident. Some remained unread for centuries. The scale of the loss is impossible to measure. Thousands of pages survive, but they may represent only a portion of what Leonardo produced. His mind reached the future in fragments. That fragmentation shaped his legend. A page showing a flying machine could be detached from years of failed reasoning around it. A weapon design could be presented without the patronage system that produced it. A reverse sentence could be treated as a code. A face could become a mystery without its merchant family. Leonardo gradually changed from a historical person into a universal symbol. And symbols invite exaggeration. The first great architect of Leonardo's legend was Giorgio Vasari, the painter and writer whose lives of the most excellent painters, sculptors, and architects helped define the history of Renaissance art. Vasari was born while Leonardo was still alive, but he belonged to a younger generation. He gathered stories, some reliable and some embellished, and presented Leonardo as a figure blessed by heaven with beauty, strength, grace, intelligence, and talent beyond ordinary measure. This portrait influenced centuries of memory. It also created a trap. Once Leonardo became the perfect genius, every uncertainty had to become a secret, and every failure had to become evidence of misunderstood greatness. The real man was more complicated. He could be generous and charming. He could also be evasive. He loved animals, yet designed weapons. He sought truth through observation, yet sometimes accepted mistaken theories. He understood the need for experiment, yet often failed to record experiments in ways others could repeat. He worked obsessively, yet left commissions incomplete. He served rulers, but never allowed any one ruler to own the whole of his mind. He was not a machine producing masterpieces without effort. He was a human being whose gifts created problems as quickly as they solved them. That is why his story remains powerful. Perfection is distant. Restlessness is recognizable. Artists immediately felt his influence. His soft modeling, psychological expressions, pyramidal compositions, and unified landscapes entered the visual language of the High Renaissance. Raphael studied his work and absorbed lessons from it. Other painters borrowed the gestures of Saint and the mysterious faces, the shadowed transitions, and the dynamic groups. The Last Supper became a model for religious drama even as the wall itself deteriorated. The Battle of Anghiari influenced images of combat even though the mural vanished. The Great Horse shaped equestrian ambition even though it was never cast. Leonardo's failures became fertile. This is unusual. Most unfinished works disappear into silence. His unfinished works generated descendants. Why? Because the idea inside them was visible enough to be copied. A younger artist could stand before the adoration of the Magi and learn how confusion circles revelation. A copyist could preserve the violent nod of Anghiari. A witness could describe the clay horse. A pupil could reuse a smile, a hand, a turn of the head. Leonardo rarely closed a problem completely. That left room for others to enter. His scientific work followed a slower path. Because the notebooks were scattered and unpublished, they did not shape the scientific revolution in a direct, continuous way. Galileo did not build modern physics from Leonardo's pages. Harvey did not discover blood circulation by reading his heart studies. Later aviation pioneers did not inherit a working aircraft from him. Claims that Leonardo secretly invented nearly every modern technology diminish the real achievement. He did not create a modern helicopter, tank, submarine, automobile, robot, or machine gun in the practical sense those words imply today. He explored principles and produced designs, some visionary, some derivative, some impossible, and some surprisingly close to later solutions. He was not a traveler from the future. He was a man of the 15th and early 16th centuries who pushed the resources of his age to their limits. That truth is far more valuable than fantasy. A visitor from the future would simply remember what already worked. Leonardo had to reason in darkness. He had to begin with birds, pulleys, water wheels, muscles, gears, and the materials available in Renaissance workshops. He had no electric motor, no steel alloys engineered for flight, no precision ball bearings, no photography, no X-ray, no microscope, no modern calculus, no scientific journal network capable of circulating his findings quickly. He drew what he could imagine from what he could touch. And sometimes imagination reached farther than material. The notebooks show that he understood several principles with remarkable clarity. He studied friction and recognized relationships that later engineers would formalize. He investigated the strength of beams, the motion of projectiles, the behavior of water, and the geometry of mechanical transmission. He represented machines in transparent or exploded form, making their operation easier to understand. But a notebook insight is not the same as a technological revolution. For knowledge to transform society, it must be communicated, tested, corrected, reproduced, and connected to institutions. Leonardo's working method was intensely personal. His pages often served as conversations with himself. That made them brilliant. It also made them difficult to inherit. Centuries later, scholars began reconstructing those conversations. Large collections received names that are now familiar. The Codex Atlanticus, assembled from many sheets, contains studies ranging from mechanics and mathematics to architecture and flight. The name refers to the large atlas-sized format in which the pages were mounted, not to the Atlantic Ocean. Other manuscripts entered the Royal Collection at Windsor, the British Library, the Institut de France, museums in Madrid, Turin, and elsewhere. The notebook, now called the Codex Leicester, focuses heavily on water, geology, light, and astronomy. Its modern ownership has made headlines, but its greater importance lies in the density of Leonardo's questions. As scholars examined the pages, a second Leonardo emerged beside the painter. This Leonardo measured, doubted, diagrammed, and pursued physical causes. The discovery did not replace the artist. It revealed why the artist saw differently. Consider the curls around the Mona Lisa's veil. They belong to the same mind that drew vortices. Consider the muscles in the apostle's hands. They belong to the same mind that dissected tendons. Consider the blue distance behind Saint Anne. It belongs to the same mind that studied how particles in the atmosphere alter color. Consider the emotional chain in the Last Supper. It belongs to the same mind that believed every bodily motion revealed an inward cause. Leonardo did not alternate between art and science as if changing professions. He used each to sharpen the other. This unity is one reason modern people find him so compelling. Our world divides knowledge into departments, credentials, specialties, and careers. Leonardo appears to stand before those walls were built. But this image also needs care. His age had specialists. Universities, guilds, courts, and workshops organized knowledge in distinct ways. Leonardo himself depended on physicians, mathematicians, artisans, and assistants. He did not know everything, and he could not have worked alone. The lesson is not that one person should master every field. The lesson is that boundaries should not prevent questions from traveling. A painter may notice something an anatomist ignores. An engineer may learn from a river. A mathematician may clarify a problem of beauty. A map may become both a weapon and a work of abstraction. Leonardo's true domain was not every subject. It was connection. His image changed again in the 19th and 20th centuries. Romantic culture celebrated the mysterious solitary genius. Scholars published manuscripts. Reproductions carried his paintings beyond royal and religious settings. Museums became national institutions. Photography allowed artworks to circulate at unprecedented scale. Then, in August 1911, the Mona Lisa disappeared from the Louvre. A museum worker named Vincenzo Peruggia removed the painting and carried it away. For more than 2 years, its empty space became an attraction. Newspapers spread the story internationally. Suspects were questioned. Rumors multiplied. The theft transformed an admired Renaissance portrait into a modern celebrity. When Peruggia attempted to return or sell the painting in Italy, he was caught. The Mona Lisa was exhibited there before returning to France in 1914. Its fame grew beyond art history. It became an object of mass culture. Advertisements borrowed the face. Artists mocked it. Tourists traveled to photograph it. Its smile became a shorthand for mystery itself. Today, the painting is protected behind security and climate-controlled glass. Crowds raise phones toward a relatively small panel, while many other works nearby receive only a passing glance. The scene would likely have fascinated Leonardo. He studied how attention works. Now millions look at a face partly because millions have looked before them. Fame becomes its own perspective system, directing every line toward a single point. Yet beneath the celebrity, the painting remains quiet. No spectacle occurs. No crown identifies power. No battle explains consequence. A woman sits. Her hands rest. A landscape continues behind her. The world cannot agree on what she is thinking. That uncertainty has survived every reproduction. Modern technology has examined Leonardo's works with infrared reflectography, X-radiography, pigment analysis, high-resolution imaging, and digital reconstruction. Researchers can see underdrawings, changes in composition, fingerprints, material layers, and earlier stages hidden beneath the surface. These tools reveal not instant inspiration, but revision. A hand shifts. A head turns. A contour disappears. A landscape changes. The masterpiece becomes a record of decisions. This is important because genius is often misunderstood as speed. Leonardo's greatest images were built slowly. Their calm surface conceals hesitation, experiment, and correction. The viewer sees unity. The material remembers struggle. Even now, attribution remains difficult. Paintings connected to Leonardo's workshop become the subjects of intense debate. Scholars compare style, documents, materials, underdrawings, and studio practice. One expert sees the master's hand. Another sees a pupil following a design. Scientific analysis can narrow possibilities, but it cannot always resolve them. This uncertainty is not a failure of history. It reflects the nature of Renaissance production. Ideas moved through workshops. Masters corrected assistants. Pupils copied cartoons. Paintings were revised over years. Documents vanished. Surfaces were restored. We want a clear signature. The past often gives us layers. The same caution applies to Leonardo's personality. Popular culture has turned him into a codemaker, a cult initiate, prophet, atheist, secret heretic, hidden inventor, and member of organizations for which no evidence exists. Mystery sells because silence can be filled with anything. Leonardo did write in mirror script, but not to conceal every thought. He did study proportions and geometry, but not every composition contains a hidden cosmic cipher. He did work for powerful families, but there is no reliable basis for many secret society stories attached to his name. He did investigate nature independently, but his precise religious beliefs are difficult to reconstruct. His paintings engage Christian subjects with seriousness and complexity. His notebooks sometimes criticize superstition or clerical behavior, but criticism is not a complete creed. The honest Leonardo is full of uncertainty. That should not disappoint us. It should make us more attentive. A historical person is not a puzzle box designed for modern entertainment. He lived before knowing which objects would become famous, which pages would survive, and which rumors would attach themselves to his name. He could not see the Louvre crowd. He could not see aircraft crossing the sky. He could not see surgeons studying the heart with machines that reveal blood in motion. He could not see his backward notes printed in countless languages. He worked without knowing whether the future would care. And for long periods, much of the future did not. That makes the notebooks more intimate. Many were not prepared for display. They contain errors, interruptions, repeated questions, and ordinary concerns. Leonardo notes money owed, clothing purchased, people to contact, and tasks to remember. Beside these appear designs for wings or diagrams of the heart. The extraordinary and ordinary share the same page. A genius still has to buy food. A visionary still loses track of debts. A master still complains about assistants. A man studying eternity still worries about tomorrow morning. This human scale helps explain his fascination with small things. Leonardo advised painters to observe stains on walls, ashes, clouds, mud, and irregular stones because the mind could discover landscapes, battles, faces, and creatures inside accidental forms. The advice sounds almost like a game. It also describes creativity. The world does not always present finished images. The mind completes possibilities. Leonardo trained himself to see more than objects. He saw transformation waiting inside them. A stain could become a city. A tendon could become a cable. A bird's wing could become a machine. A dining hall could become Jerusalem on the night of betrayal. A merchant's wife could become the most recognized face on earth. This imagination was disciplined by observation, but it was never imprisoned by it. He did not copy nature passively. He asked what nature could teach design. He also understood that sight could deceive. He studied perspective, reflection, shadow, and the apparent size of distant objects. He distinguished between what exists and what the eye reports. This awareness shaped his paintings. The Mona Lisa changes because perception changes. The Last Supper extends the room through constructed perspective. Distant mountains become blue because air intervenes. Soft edges feel alive because the eye does not perceive every boundary equally. Leonardo painted the act of seeing as much as the things seen. And that leads to one of the deepest reasons his work feels modern. He included the observer inside the problem. A painting was not complete without the eye that encountered it. A map depended on a viewpoint. A machine had to be understood through diagrams. A face revealed different meanings as attention moved. Knowledge was not only out there in the world. It was shaped by how a human being approached the world. Leonardo did not develop this into a modern philosophy of mind. He did something more immediate. He demonstrated it. Look at the smile, and it shifts. Look at the Last Supper, and the room seems to continue. Look at the deluge drawings, and a few lines become unstoppable force. The viewer participates in the creation of meaning. The works survive because they continue to recruit the living. There is also a darker reason Leonardo remains relevant. He understood that knowledge and power are inseparable. His maps could help rulers control territory. His mechanical studies could build devices of war. His festivals could turn politics into spectacle. His portraits could stabilize status. His monuments could manufacture dynastic memory. He was not merely observing the Renaissance. He was helping powerful people create the images through which power wanted to be remembered. But his art often exceeded that purpose. The Last Supper may have served Sforza patronage, yet it focuses on betrayal and human fragility. The Battle of Anghiari may have celebrated Florence, yet it shows violence deforming men and animals. The Great Horse may have glorified Francesco Sforza, yet its destruction reveals how quickly dynastic dreams become targets. Leonardo accepted commissions from power. Time changed their meaning. This is what history does. A ruler believes a monument will make his name permanent. A century later, viewers remember the artist more clearly than the patron. Ludovico Sforza wanted Leonardo to strengthen the dynasty. The dynasty fell. Cesare Borgia wanted maps that strengthened conquest. His state vanished. Francis I wanted the prestige of possessing Leonardo. The king remains important, but the old man he welcomed has become the greater universal symbol. Power purchased art. Art escaped power. Yet Leonardo's legacy should not be reduced to victory over patrons. He depended on them. Without Verrocchio's workshop, Ludovico's court, religious commissions, French protection, and the labor of assistants, much of his work could not have existed. Independence is often supported by structures it later outlives. The Renaissance was not made by isolated heroes standing above society. It was made by networks that included quarry workers, metal casters, pigment sellers, scribes, carpenters, monks, merchants, mathematicians, servants, apprentices, rulers, and models whose names were often forgotten. Leonardo rose from that world. He did not float beyond it. Even his famous illegitimacy must be understood carefully. It limited traditional pathways, but his father's status still gave him connections. His apprenticeship in a leading Florentine workshop was an opportunity unavailable to most children. His life combined exclusion and privilege. That combination may have helped create his unusual freedom. He belonged enough to enter elite circles. He stood apart enough to resist their categories. He called himself a man without letters, yet spent his life building a language of lines. He lacked a university degree, yet pursued questions across fields. He struggled with Latin, yet engaged ancient authorities through translation and collaboration. He was not outside knowledge. He entered through another door. That door was experience. Again and again, his notes returned to the belief that wisdom is the daughter of experience. He did not mean that books were useless. He collected books and sought learned companions. He meant that claims about nature must eventually meet nature. A bird must be watched. A body must be opened. Water must be allowed to move. Light must strike a surface. A theory that cannot survive observation is only words. This principle seems obvious today because centuries of science have made it familiar. In Leonardo's world, it was radical in practice. Authority carried immense weight. Ancient writers were respected. Religious and medical traditions shaped explanation. Leonardo did not reject all authority, but he refused to stop at it. He looked again. That phrase may be the simplest description of his life. Look again. The face is not one emotion. The river is not random. The shell on the mountain is not a trick. The heart valve is not passive. The bird is not held up by miracle alone. The shadow is not empty darkness. The unfinished painting is not dead. Look again. His mistakes also become clearer when viewed this way. Sometimes he looked and interpreted through expectations he had not fully escaped. Sometimes he drew a theory more beautifully than the evidence deserved. Sometimes he trusted analogy too far. Sometimes he delayed until the world removed the opportunity. Observation does not guarantee truth. It begins the pursuit. Leonardo never reached the end. Perhaps no one could. Near the end of his life, he is said to have lamented that he had offended God and humanity by not working at his art as he should have. The exact words come through later biography and cannot be treated as a direct recording. But the sentiment fits the tension visible across his career. The world saw abundance. Leonardo saw incompletion. The world saw the Last Supper. He saw the paint failing. The world saw the giant horse. He saw bronze turned into cannon. The world saw the Mona Lisa. He saw another glaze that might soften the mouth. The world saw thousands of notebook pages. He saw the book they had not become. This dissatisfaction can appear tragic. It was also the engine of his greatness. A satisfied Leonardo might have finished more paintings. He might also have stopped asking why the horizon changes color. He might have delivered the portrait and never carried it to France. He might have repeated successful formulas. Instead, he placed every answer under pressure. His failure to stop became our inheritance. But admiration should not romanticize suffering or paralysis. Endless revision can destroy work. Unshared knowledge can vanish. Perfectionism can become avoidance. Leonardo's career contains warnings as well as inspiration. An idea must sometimes leave the mind before it is perfect. A page must reach another reader. A painting must be released. A bridge must survive contact with workers, budgets, weather, and stone. The world does not receive intentions. It receives what can be made, preserved, and transmitted. Leonardo knew this better than anyone, because so much of his life stood between vision and survival. And still, enough survived. Enough paint remained on a wall for the apostles, shocked to cross 5 centuries. Enough lines remained on paper for a modern engineer to follow the movement of gears. Enough shadow remained around a mouth for millions to sense a smile beginning. Enough anatomical drawings remained for physicians to recognize the precision of a colleague born before modern medicine. Enough fragments remained to reveal the shape of the mind that created them. That may be his greatest unfinished work. Not one painting, not one machine, the shape of a mind. We know Leonardo through the paths his attention took. A question begins in painting and ends in anatomy. A study of a river becomes a military plan, then a geological theory, then the background of a portrait. A court spectacle becomes knowledge of machinery. A dissection becomes a gesture in sacred art. The notebooks do not offer a final system. They show movement, and movement was always his true subject. Water moves, light moves, bodies move, emotion moves through bodies. Cities rise and fall. Patrons gain power and lose it. Paint cracks. Memory travels. A man born outside marriage in a Tuscan village becomes the guest of a French king. Then his grave is disturbed, his papers scattered, and his face reconstructed through stories. Nothing remains still. Even the Mona Lisa's smile moves. Return, then, to the manor near Amboise in 1519. The old man has prepared his will. Outside, the Loire Valley enters spring. Rivers continue toward the sea. Birds cross the air he spent decades trying to understand. Light enters through windows and softens the edges of the room. Nearby lie paintings he could not surrender. Around him are people whose names rarely appear on posters, but whose loyalty carries his work forward. Francesco Melzi waits to inherit the papers. Servants attend the household. The king's court continues its ceremonies and plans. Leonardo's body weakens. His questions do not receive a final answer. There is no moment when every notebook becomes one perfect book. No machine rises into flight. No bronze horse stands over Milan. No restored wall returns the Last Supper to its first morning. No final glaze makes the portrait complete. Death arrives while the work remains open. For most people, that would look like defeat. But Leonardo had spent his life revealing that an unfinished thing can continue moving. The adoration draws us into a revelation that paint never completed. The Battle of Anghiari survives through copies of a vanished wall. The anatomical treatise exists as a possibility scattered across pages. The flying machines failed to fly, but the question of flight passed onward. The paintings carried into France entered the memory of the world. His life did not end in completion. It ended in transmission. That is the final transformation. A private question becomes a public inheritance. A sketch becomes a challenge to another century. A failed experiment becomes a warning. A surviving line becomes evidence that someone looked more closely. Leonardo da Vinci did not become immortal because he knew everything. He became immortal because he made ignorance feel impossible to ignore. He looked at ordinary water and saw laws. He looked at the body and saw architecture. He looked at a face and saw a mind no outline could contain. He looked at the sky and refused to believe that flight belonged only to birds. He looked at stone and found the memory of vanished seas. He looked at power and built wonders for it, while recording truths that would outlast it. He looked at the world as if creation were still happening. Perhaps that is why his work never feels entirely finished. To finish it would mean the world had stopped changing. It has not. The rivers still turn. The shadows still soften. The body still hides mysteries beneath the skin. The smile still changes when we move our eyes. And somewhere between the first question asked by a child in the hills of Vinci and the final pages arranged by an old man in France lies the reason Leonardo remains larger than a normal history lesson. He reminds us that wonder is not the opposite of knowledge. Wonder is where knowledge begins. History remembers the masterpieces. It often forgets the doubt, decay, abandoned walls, lost bronze, scattered pages, and nights spent asking questions no patron had requested. But those were not separate from the genius. They were the cost of it. Leonardo's greatest creation was not a painting, a machine, or a code hidden from the world. It was a way of seeing in which nothing was too small to study, no boundary was permanent, and no answer was allowed to become the end of curiosity. He died believing there was more to do. 5 centuries later, we are still following the questions he left open.